The year was 1876. The wind on the prairie wasn't just wind. It was a physical thing, a presence that pushed on the walls of the little ranch house, looking for a way in. It was a lonely sound in a lonely place. Inside, Elias Hart was living the worst day of his life. In his arms, he held his infant daughter, Hope. Her tiny lips, which should have been pink and full of life, were the color of a dead winter plum. He paced the floor back and forth, the wood groaning under his boots. A desperate, careful rhythm. Tap, 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 on her back. Nothing. In the other cradle, her twin sister, Lily, was screaming her lungs out, a sound that tore right through him. On the table, a single folded ribbon. It had belonged to his wife, Margaret. Now it just sat there, a silent witness to the ghost that filled the room. Then came the knock. Not a polite rap. 3 hard strikes against the door, sharp enough to cut right through the howl of the wind. Elias froze. Nobody came out this far. Nobody. He stumbled to the door and pulled it open, and the wind screamed into the house. A woman stood there. Young, her face smudged with the dust of the road, a small satchel in her hand. Her eyes were steady, and they took in everything in a single sweeping glance. The frantic father, the crying twin, and the tiny blue-lipped baby in his arms. His voice came out cracked, a piece of broken glass. "Please," he begged. "She can't catch air. I've tried. God help me, I've tried everything." The woman, Nora, didn't waste a second. She moved past him into the room as if she belonged there. "Let me take her." For just a heartbeat, his arms wouldn't let go. This was all he had left of Margaret. Then the fear won, and he surrendered the tiny bundle. "Is she—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The words died in his throat. "She won't," Nora said. Her voice was quiet, but it was solid. A rock in the middle of his storm. She went to the wash basin, her movements quick and sure. She turned Hope onto her forearm and gave 3 firm pats between the baby's shoulder blades. Still nothing. The silence in the room was deafening. She tipped the baby forward, checking her mouth with a practiced finger, and then pressed down on the tiny chest with a gentle, steady rhythm. "Come on, little one," she whispered. Her voice was a low hum, a prayer. "Breathe for your father. He's right here." And then, a sound, a wet, ragged cough, a gasp. Hope drew a thin, wavering breath, then another. The blue faded from her lips, replaced by a slow, creeping pink. Elias felt his knees buckle. The floor seemed to fall away from under him. He reached for his daughter, pressing her to his chest, feeling the miracle of her breath against his skin. "Thank you," he choked out. Thank you." "Boiled water," Nora said softly. She was already at the stove, her focus absolute. "The steam will help loosen what's in her chest. We need to keep her close tonight." The crisis passed, but the fear lingered in the corners of the room, a cold shadow. As the kettle began to sing, Nora reached for her satchel, ready to leave. Elias stopped her. "You came about the position," he said. It wasn't a question. "I did," she confirmed. "Reverend Cole Bennett sent me. He said the twins needed steady hands." Elias looked from the cradles to the window, where a patch of fresh-turned earth scarred the land. His wife's grave. He hardened his jaw. "You're only here for my twins," he said, his voice flat. "That's all. Don't expect anything I can't give." Nora's eyes never wavered. "You have my word, Mr. Hart. I'm here to care for them, not to trouble you." "Good," Elias said, "because I'm not a man for conversation or company." "That suits me fine," she replied, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something he couldn't read. "The babies are company enough." The next morning, Elias woke to the smell of coffee. He'd spent the night in a chair between the 2 cradles, a shotgun across his lap, watching Nora as she watched his children. He didn't trust her, not one bit. Her arrival was too convenient, her skills too practiced. She was like a doctor, but she didn't look like any doctor he'd ever seen. He'd watched her all night, expecting a trick, a sudden move. But all she did was care for his girls with a tenderness that made his throat ache. She hummed a low, sad tune as she worked, a song he'd never heard before. He went outside to do his chores, the cold morning air a slap to the face. When he came back in, the house was different. It was warm. The air didn't feel so heavy. Nora had a fire going, and the twins were sleeping peacefully. On the table was a plate of cornbread and a fresh cup of coffee. "You didn't have to cook," he grumbled, hanging his hat. "I was awake," she said, not looking up from where she was mending a tear in Lily's blanket. "And they were hungry." He took a sip of the coffee. It was good. Too good. It tasted just like Margaret used to make it. He set the cup down with a sharp clink. The coincidence was unsettling. A knot of suspicion tightened in his gut. This woman knew things she had no business knowing. He watched her for a week. She moved through his house with a quiet efficiency that was both a blessing and a curse. She never asked where anything was. She just seemed to know. She found the spare linens without a word. She knew which floorboard creaked outside the nursery. She even knew to put a folded bit of leather under the leg of the wobbly kitchen table. These were the small, intimate details of a life, his life with Margaret, and this stranger knew them all. One night he walked past the nursery and heard her singing again, the same sad lullaby. He stopped in the shadows, listening. The melody was familiar, tugging at a memory he couldn't quite grasp. It was a song Margaret used to hum when she thought no one was listening. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Who was this woman? On Sunday, he hitched the wagon. He had to go to town for supplies, and he couldn't leave the twins with her, not yet. So, he brought her along. The town of Red Rock Crossing was little more than a dusty street with a church, a mercantile, and a livery. But it had eyes, and all of them were on his wagon. Augusta Price, who ran the mercantile and the town's gossip mill, stood on the porch of her shop like a vulture on a fence post. Her gaze was sharp and unforgiving. She saw Nora holding Hope, and her lips thinned into a razor line. A few other women from the church sewing circle stood with her, whispering behind their gloved hands. "Mr. Hart," Augusta said, her voice dripping with disapproval. "So this is your help." "This is Miss Hale," Elias replied, his voice hard. "She saved my child." Augusta sniffed. "Children need more than luck, Mr. Hart. They need proper judgment." From his other side, another voice cut in, low and venomous. "And a woman in a widower's house needs a reputation, something she clearly doesn't have." Nora didn't flinch. She met Augusta's gaze directly. "They'll have both," she said, her voice steady. "Judgment and luck." Augusta just stared, her eyes lingering on Nora for a beat too long. The message was clear. "You are not welcome here." The whispers followed them all the way to the church steps. "Living in his house," one woman muttered, just loud enough to be heard. "Shameless." Inside the church, Elias leaned close to Nora. "Ignore them," he murmured. "I've heard worse," she replied, her attention focused on settling the twins. It's amazing how much people can say without knowing anything at all. But he could feel the tremor in her hands. The town had drawn its battle lines, and Nora was on the wrong side. After the service, Reverend Bennett pulled him aside. The Reverend was a good man, but he looked troubled. "Walk with me, Elias." They stepped into the wind-battered churchyard. "She didn't tell you, did she?" Bennett asked, his voice low. "Tell me what?" "About Margaret. Your Margaret came to see me, a month before the twins were born. She had a feeling, a premonition. She feared she might not survive the birth." Elias felt the ground shift beneath him. "What are you talking about?" "She made me promise," the Reverend continued, his eyes full of sorrow. "She said, If I'm not here to raise my girls, you find Nora Hale. You see that Nora is the one who cares for them. She gave me a way to contact her, said Nora owed her a debt. A debt? Elias's mind reeled. Why her? Who is she? They met in Denver, she said. Nora helped Margaret through a difficult time. Margaret trusted her. She said Nora had a steadiness, that she was a woman who kept her promises. Elias felt his jaw tighten. Margaret never said a single word of this to me. She wanted to spare you the worry, Bennett said gently, and maybe she knew you'd try to talk her out of it. Elias stumbled back to his wagon, his head spinning. Nora was no stranger. She was a secret his wife had kept from him. That night, the rain came, drumming a relentless rhythm on the roof. The world felt small, just the four of them in the circle of lamplight. Elias couldn't look at Nora without seeing his wife's deception. He stood in the doorway of the nursery, watching her rock the cradles. He heard her whisper to Hope, her voice barely a breath against the sound of the rain. "Your mother asked me to find you," she murmured to the sleeping infant, "and I did. I keep my promises." Elias stepped into the room. The floorboard groaned, announcing his presence. Nora looked up, her eyes wide in the dim light. "You knew Margaret," he said. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Her composure finally cracked. A flicker of fear crossed her face. "Yes," she whispered. "In Denver. 2 summers ago. She helped someone I loved very much." Her voice trailed off, lost in the sound of the storm. "Reverend Bennett knew how to reach me. She made me promise." Elias's voice was dangerously quiet. "And you kept that promise. You came here, into my home, and you never said a word." "I keep the ones that matter," she replied, her gaze dropping to the floor. He stood there for a long time, the silence stretching between them, thick with unspoken words and his wife's ghost. He was a man drowning in secrets, and he had a feeling this was only the beginning. The prairie sun was leaning low and orange when Elias saw the rider. 2 miles from town, at the fork in the road. The man sat tall on his horse, wearing a good coat and boots that were polished despite the dust. He had the easy smile of a man who was used to getting what he wanted. He tipped his hat as Elias approached. "Afternoon," he said, his voice smooth as whiskey. "I'm looking for a woman. Dark hair, quiet way about her. Might be calling herself Nora Hale." Elias kept his hands loose on the reins, his face a stony mask. "What's your business with her?" "Family business," the rider said. "Name's Jasper Doyle." His eyes were a little too bright, a little too sharp. "She was my brother's wife. He's dead now. By his own hand, she says. After she ruined him, shamed him in front of the whole world." The smile vanished from Jasper's face, replaced by something hard and ugly. 3 years I've been on her trail. My father's gone, my mother too. Heartbreak, they say. There's no one left to put the truth right but me." Elias felt a cold dread seep into his bones. This was it, the other shoe dropping. "I can't help you," Elias said, his voice level. Jasper's bright eyes narrowed. "Oh, I think you can," he said softly. "People in Red Rock Crossing talk. They say there's a new woman at the Hart Ranch, a woman with 2 infant children that aren't hers." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "See, my brother and his wife, they couldn't have children. A source of great shame for him. Funny how she shows up here playing mother to another woman's babies." He straightened up, his smile returning, but it was all teeth. "We'll see, Mr. Hart. We'll see." Jasper turned his horse and rode toward town, leaving Elias alone on the road with a cloud of dust and a storm of questions. Elias rode home like the devil was on his heels. He found Nora stacking firewood, her sleeves rolled up, her face calm. But when she saw him, her composure faltered. She knew. She knew something was wrong. "A man was asking for you," Elias said, his voice tight. "Jasper Doyle." The stack of wood in her arms slipped. She caught it just before it fell. Her eyes darted to the house, to the door, as if checking the latch. "He's my brother-in-law," she said, her voice a strained whisper. "And?" Elias demanded, his patience gone. Her eyes met his, and what he saw in them made his blood run cold. It was pure, unadulterated terror. "And he believes I killed his brother," she said, her voice barely audible. "He's wrong." "Then tell me," Elias growled. "Tell me everything, right now." She drew a shaky breath, and the story spilled out of her, hesitant at first, then gaining a desperate momentum. Her husband, she said, was a man of two faces, charming to the world, a monster behind closed doors. He drank, he gambled, he had a rage that could be triggered by anything or nothing at all. He wanted children, an heir to a name that was already tarnished. But Nora refused. "I wouldn't bring a child into a house where kindness wasn't certain," she said, looking down at her hands. "A friend. A good man. He tried to help me leave. My husband found out." Her voice broke. "He took a fireplace poker to him, again and again. I tried to stop him, and he turned on me. He broke my wrist." Elias's hands curled into fists at his sides. He could feel the phantom shape of a poker in his own hand, could imagine the rage. "And then?" he asked, his voice rough. "And then my husband told everyone that I had been the one with the friend, that I had killed him in a fit of passion, and because he was a Doyle and I was nobody, they listened." She looked up at him, her eyes pleading. "Months later, my husband's debts caught up to him. He drank himself to death in a lonely hotel room. But Jasper prefers the story where I'm the villain. He's been hunting me ever since." The story was horrific, but it was just a story. "Do you have anything?" Elias asked, his voice hard. "Anything at all that proves your word?" Her hand trembled as she went to her small satchel by the door. She unlatched the clasp and pulled out a folded, yellowed piece of paper. "A letter," she said. "My husband. Before the end. He wrote a confession. Sent it to a friend, a banker he had wronged. Reverend Bennett has a copy. I made sure another copy exists, far from here." Elias took the letter. The handwriting was erratic, desperate. It spoke of shame, of debts, of a terrible mistake, and a good man wrongly accused. It didn't name names, but it painted a picture of a man spiraling into his own private hell. Elias read it twice. He wanted to find a lie in the words, a crack in her story. He couldn't. He looked at her, standing there, so fragile and so strong, and made a decision. He set the letter down on the table. "You won't run," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a command. "Not while I breathe." She gave him a small, grateful nod, and for the first time since she'd arrived, the air between them felt clear. The battle was coming, and he had just chosen his side. But as he looked at the letter again, a new, chilling thought emerged. It was a confession, yes, but it was also vague. It confessed to a terrible mistake, but what if that mistake wasn't what Nora claimed? What if the letter was a clever trap, designed to be read in different ways? His trust was a fragile thing, newly built, and the wind was already starting to howl. Elias went to town the next day, his hat pulled low. He wasn't looking for a fight, not yet. He was listening. He learned that Jasper Doyle had taken a room at the hotel and was buying rounds of whiskey at the saloon, telling his tragic story to anyone who would listen. And they were listening. A grieving brother seeking justice for a murdered sibling? That was a story people understood. A strange woman living in a widower's house? That was a story people liked to whisper about. He saw the way the town looked at him now. The nods were a little colder, the greetings a little quicker. Jasper was poisoning the well, and he was doing it fast. Back at the ranch, A silent siege began. Nora kept the twins close, rarely letting them out of her sight. An unspoken tension settled over the small house. Every shadow seemed a little longer. Every gust of wind sounded like a footstep. Elias found himself watching the horizon constantly, scanning for a lone rider. He started keeping the shotgun loaded and near the door. He and Nora didn't talk about it. They didn't have to. They fell into a rhythm born of necessity. She taught him the quiet magic of caring for infants, how a little steam from a kettle could soothe a cough, how a drop of tincture could calm a fretful cry. He, in turn, showed her the rhythms of the ranch, how to set a fence post so it would stand true against the wind, how to read the clouds for signs of a storm. They were two strangers, bound together by two babies and a looming threat. In the quiet moments, between the work and the worry, something shifted. He started to see past the mysterious stranger and see the woman. He saw the weariness in her eyes, the strength in her hands. He saw the way she looked at Hope and Lily, with a fierce protective love that mirrored his own. One evening, he came in from the fields, tired and sore. The twins were asleep. Nora was sitting at the table, mending one of his shirts by the light of the lamp. The needle moved in and out of the fabric with a steady, hypnotic rhythm. She looked up as he entered, and a small, tired smile touched her lips. "They slept through the whole afternoon," she said softly. "They're growing." He nodded, hanging his hat on the peg. "You're good with them," he said. The words felt inadequate. "I had practice," she said, her eyes dropping back to her sewing. "The friend your husband." He started, then stopped, not wanting to open the wound. She looked up again, and her eyes were clear. "His name was Samuel. He had a little sister. Their parents were gone. I helped him raise her." The story hung in the air between them, simple and profound. It wasn't just a tale of abuse and escape. It was a story of loyalty, of caring for the helpless. It was her story. A few days later, Elias found something that shook him to his core. He was cleaning out a small trunk of Margaret's things he hadn't been able to touch since she died. At the bottom, wrapped in a piece of silk, was a small hand-carved wooden bird. He remembered when Margaret had gotten it. A gift, she'd said, from a dear friend in Denver, a friend who had helped her through a difficult time. He stood there, the wooden bird cold in his palm, his blood turning to ice. He went into the kitchen. Nora was humming that same sad lullaby, the one he now knew was for a lost friend named Samuel. He walked over to her satchel, which sat on a chair by the door. He opened it. He knew he shouldn't. It was a violation, but he had to know. Tucked inside a small pocket was another wooden bird, identical to the one in his hand. He held them both out to her, two perfect, identical birds. The blood drained from her face. "Margaret was your friend in Denver," he said, his voice flat. "The someone I loved you mentioned. It wasn't Samuel. It was Margaret. You lied to me." "I didn't lie," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I just didn't tell you everything. I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" he demanded. Before she could answer, a shadow fell across the doorway. Jasper Doyle stood there, his polished boots planted firmly on their porch, and in his hand he held a piece of paper. "Nora Hale," he said, his voice booming with authority. "Or should I say, Eleanor Vance. I have a warrant for your arrest, for the murder of my brother, Daniel Doyle." He smiled, a predator's grin. "Your lies have finally run out." Elias stood frozen between the two of them. The woman he was starting to trust had a different name. The man hunting her had a warrant, and in his hand he held two identical birds, a symbol of a secret friendship that felt more like a conspiracy. Jasper didn't come alone. The town sheriff, a portly man named Gable with a drooping mustache, stood behind him, looking uncomfortable. A few other men from town, men Jasper had been buying whiskey for all week, loitered by the fence, their faces a mixture of curiosity and menace. "What is this?" Elias demanded, stepping in front of Nora. Jasper waved the warrant. "This is justice, Mr. Hart. This is a legal document from the next county over. It says this woman, Eleanor Vance, is wanted for murder. She's been a fugitive for 3 years." He then unrolled a second piece of paper. It was a wanted poster. The drawing was crude, but the resemblance was unmistakable. Underneath the drawing, it listed her name and her crime, and it offered a reward, a substantial one. "She's a con artist," Jasper announced to the assembled men. "Preys on lonely men. Widowers, they say, are her specialty. She gets into their homes, into their lives, and then she takes everything." The men by the fence muttered amongst themselves. Augusta Price and her sewing circle had appeared at the edge of the property, drawn by the commotion. Augusta's face was a mask of grim satisfaction. She had been right all along. "Get off my land," Elias said, his voice low and dangerous. "Not without her," Jasper said, taking a step forward. Sheriff Gable put a hand on Jasper's arm. "Now, Jasper, let's do this by the book. Mr. Hart, I have to ask Miss Vance to come with us." "Her name is Nora Hale," Elias insisted, his mind racing. Was it all a lie? Eleanor Vance. The name felt alien, yet the wanted poster. "That's the name she uses when she's running," Jasper sneered. Ask her to deny it." Elias turned to Nora. Her face was pale, but her eyes were defiant. "Is that your name?" he asked, the words feeling like stones in his mouth. She hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. "It was," she said softly. "Before." The admission hung in the air, a confession of guilt in the eyes of the town. Augusta Price let out a triumphant, "Ha!" "You see?" Jasper said, his voice ringing with victory. "She's a liar and a murderer, and you, Mr. Hart, you let her into your home. You let her near your children." The accusation hit Elias like a physical blow. He looked at the faces of his neighbors, saw the suspicion and the fear. He looked at Nora, this woman of a dozen secrets, and he looked at the house where his 2 daughters slept, completely vulnerable. The sheriff took another step forward. "Ma'am, you need to come with me." Nora looked at Elias, her eyes pleading, not for him to save her, but for him to believe her. And in that moment, Elias had to make a choice. Trust the man with the law on his side, or trust the woman with the lies in her past. He made his choice. "You're not taking her," Elias said, his voice like flint. He moved to stand directly in front of Nora, blocking her from the sheriff. He wasn't a big man, but he was solid, a man made of prairie earth and hard work. And right now he looked immovable. Jasper laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Playing the hero, Hart? This woman is a killer. She'll turn on you, too, once she has what she wants." "What she wants," Elias said, "is to be left alone. She came here to care for my children, at my dead wife's request." He turned to the crowd. "My wife, Margaret, knew her. She trusted her. Are you going to trust the word of a stranger with a 3-year-old piece of paper over the dying wish of a woman you all knew?" This gave the crowd pause. They had all liked Margaret. Reverend Bennett, who had arrived and was standing quietly at the back, nodded his confirmation. "It's true. Margaret spoke to me of it herself." Jasper's face darkened with fury. His plan was slipping through his fingers. "He's lying to protect her. The warrant is real. Sheriff, do your duty." Sheriff Gable looked torn. He was a man who followed the rules, but he also knew Elias Hart, knew him to be an honest, if quiet, man. "Elias," the sheriff said, his voice pleading, "don't make this difficult. Let me just take her in. We can sort it out." "You take her," Elias said, "and you'll be making an enemy of me. I'll get a lawyer from the Capitol. I'll prove this is a lie, but she is not setting foot in your jail." The standoff was broken by a cry from the house. One of the twins was waking up. Nora's head whipped around, her maternal instinct overriding everything else. The sound seemed to break the spell. The men weren't looking at a fugitive anymore. They were looking at a mother and a father protecting his family. Jasper saw his advantage disappearing. He had to act now. "Fine," he snarled. "Have it your way, Hart, but this isn't over. This town will see the truth, and when they do, they'll run you both out on a rail." He stormed away, his posse of drinkers trailing uncertainly behind him. Sheriff Gable lingered for a moment. "You're playing a dangerous game, Elias," he warned, before turning to leave. The crowd dispersed, Augusta Price casting one last venomous glare over her shoulder. Elias, Nora, and the Reverend were left alone in the sudden quiet. Elias's legs felt weak. He turned to Nora. Her face was a mess of gratitude and fear. "Eleanor Vance," he said, the name still tasting wrong. "You have a lot of explaining to do." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I know," she whispered, "and you deserve the whole truth. That night, with the doors locked and the curtains drawn, Nora, or Eleanor, told him everything. Her real name was Eleanor Vance. Jasper was indeed her brother-in-law, but the story he told was a twisted, poisoned version of the truth. Her husband, Daniel, and his brother Jasper were not respectable men. They were partners, swindlers. They moved from town to town, running sophisticated cons, preying on the wealthy and the naive. Daniel was the charm, Jasper was the muscle. "And I was the bait," she said, her voice full of self-loathing. "They trained me. How to act, how to dress, how to earn a person's trust. For years, that was my life." Elias listened in stunned silence. This capable, quiet woman had been part of a criminal enterprise. "One of their targets," she continued, "was a young man who had just inherited a small fortune, a kind, trusting man. His name was Samuel. Samuel, the name from the lullaby. But this time was different. Samuel had a sister who was very ill. He wasn't spending the money on himself, he was using it to pay for her doctors. He was a good man. I couldn't go through with it. I tried to warn him. Daniel, her husband, found out. His rage was terrifying. He beat her, locked her in her room, but not before she managed to get a message to Samuel." "That's when I met Margaret," Nora said, her eyes distant. "She was in Denver visiting family. She was Samuel's cousin. When she heard what was happening, she tried to help me. She gave me the carved bird. She said it was a symbol of freedom." The pieces were clicking into place, awful, jagged pieces. "What happened to Samuel?" Elias asked. "Daniel and Jasper confronted him. They tried to take the money by force. Samuel fought back, in the struggle. Daniel hit him with a poker, just like I told you. But here's the part I left out." She took a deep breath. "Samuel didn't die. I got there just as the sheriff arrived. I told them what Daniel had done. Daniel was arrested." "So the story about you killing him was a lie Daniel and Jasper concocted to discredit me," she finished. "They knew I was the only witness who could put them both away for good. Daniel killed himself in his jail cell before he could testify. Jasper escaped, and he's been hunting me, the only person left who knows the full extent of his crimes, ever since." She looked at Elias, her face bare with the ugly truth. "I ran. I changed my name. I tried to disappear. When Reverend Bennett contacted me, it felt like a sign, a chance to do something good, to repay the kindness Margaret showed me. But I brought my past with me. I've endangered you and your children. I should leave." "No," Elias said, his voice firm. He believed her. Every word rang with the hard, cold sound of truth. "You're not running anymore. This is your home now. We fight him. Together." But a new, terrifying thought took root in his mind. Jasper wasn't just seeking revenge for his brother's reputation. He was silencing a witness. and a man desperate enough to hunt someone for 3 years would not be stopped by a locked door. He would do anything to make sure the truth stayed buried forever. The ranch became a fortress. Elias patrolled the property at night, shotgun in hand. During the day, he never worked farther than shouting distance from the house. He taught Nora how to use the rifle, her hands steady, her eye true. The fear was a constant companion, a third adult in the house. It sat with them at meals. It watched them as they tended the twins. It was in every snapped twig, every distant coyote howl. Jasper, for his part, was playing a longer game. He didn't come back to the ranch. Instead, he worked on the town. He was a spider, spinning a web of lies and suspicion. He spent his days in the saloon and his evenings on the porch of the mercantile, talking to anyone who would listen. He twisted Nora's story into something monstrous. She wasn't just a con artist. She was a black widow. Samuel wasn't an innocent victim. He was her lover, and they had conspired to murder her husband for his money. He painted Elias as a fool, a lonely man blinded by a pretty face, endangering not only his own children, but the entire community. Doors that had been slowly opening to Nora slammed shut. The whispers turned into open hostility. When Nora went to the mercantile for flour, Augusta Price refused to serve her. "We don't want your kind here," she said, her voice cold. Someone threw a rock that shattered one of their windows in the middle of the night. A dead snake was left on their porch. They were isolated, surrounded by an enemy they couldn't fight. Their only ally was Reverend Bennett, who tried to speak reason to his congregation, but found their ears deafened by fear and suspicion. One afternoon, Elias rode out to check on a section of fence Jasper's men had cut during the night. He'd only been gone an hour, but when he rode back over the rise, he saw it. Smoke. Thick, black smoke billowing from the direction of his home. Panic, cold, and absolute seized him. He spurred his horse into a frantic gallop, his heart pounding against his ribs. The barn was on fire. Flames licked up the dry timber, roaring and crackling. He leaped from his horse before it had even stopped, his eyes scanning wildly for Nora and the twins. He found her by the well, her face smudged with soot, a bucket in her hand. The twins were in their cradles, which she had dragged a safe distance away from the inferno. She was trying to fight the fire alone. "Nora!" he yelled, grabbing the other bucket. It was hopeless. The barn was already a lost cause. All they could do was try to keep the flames from spreading to the house. They worked in a desperate, silent rhythm, throwing bucket after bucket of water onto the thirsty flames. Men from the neighboring ranches started to arrive, having seen the smoke. They helped, but their faces were grim, their eyes full of accusation. They were helping a neighbor, as was the code of the West, but they were not on his side. When the fire was finally out, the barn was a smoldering ruin. Elias stood there, chest heaving, staring at the wreckage. It was more than just a building. It was his livelihood. It was the future he had planned to build for his daughters. And Jasper had taken it away with a single match. That evening, as the sun set over the charred remains of his barn, Elias knew the game had changed. This was no longer about warrants and whispers. This was about survival. He looked at Nora, who was quietly singing to the twins, her face illuminated by the lamp. He saw the iron will in her, the unbreakable spirit. She had survived the Doyles once before. She would do it again. But then he looked at his daughters, sleeping so peacefully, and a cold dread washed over him. Jasper had destroyed his barn. What would he target next? The house, or the people inside it? The answer came a few nights later. A storm was brewing on the horizon, the air thick and heavy with the promise of rain. Elias was on the porch, the shotgun across his lap, when he heard a noise from the side of the house. Not the wind. A scraping sound, like a window being quietly pried open. The nursery window. He moved without a sound, his boots silent on the wooden planks. He rounded the corner of the house just in time to see a figure slipping through the small window. It was Jasper. Elias didn't hesitate. He raised the shotgun. "Get out!" he hissed, his voice a low growl. Jasper froze, half in and half out of the window. He hadn't expected Elias to be waiting. He slowly raised his hands. "Just wanted to see the babies," he said, his voice a mocking whisper. "Make sure they were safe, with a murderer for a nanny." "Get out," Elias repeated, cocking both hammers of the shotgun. The clicks echoed in the tense silence. Jasper slowly backed out of the window. But as his feet touched the ground, he moved with lightning speed. He lunged, not at Elias, but to the side, grabbing a heavy wood axe that was leaning against the wall. He swung it wildly, forcing Elias to jump back. The axe head embedded itself in the wall of the house, inches from where Elias's head had been. The front door flew open, and Nora stood there, the rifle in her hands, its barrel aimed squarely at Jasper's chest. "Drop it," she said, her voice shaking but firm. Jasper laughed, a wild, unhinged sound. He wrenched the axe from the wall. "You think you've won? You think this broken-down rancher can protect you? I will never stop. I will burn everything you love to the ground. I will take those babies and I will—" He never finished the sentence. From the darkness, a new voice cut through the air. "You'll do nothing, Jasper." Sheriff Gable stepped out from behind the remains of the barn, a pistol in his hand. Behind him were half a dozen townsmen, all armed. "We heard the commotion," the sheriff said, his voice weary. "Figured you might be causing trouble again." Jasper looked around, trapped. His eyes were wild, cornered. He was no longer the charming, grieving brother. He was a rabid animal. He made one last, desperate move. He feinted towards the sheriff, then spun around and charged at Nora, the axe raised high. Elias fired the shotgun, not at Jasper, but into the air. The blast was deafening. It was a signal. At that exact moment, the storm broke. The sky opened up, and a torrential downpour began, accompanied by a furious wind that whipped dust and debris into the air. It was chaos. In the split second of distraction caused by the gunshot and the storm, Reverend Bennett and Augusta Price emerged from the darkness. And Augusta was holding a lantern and a thick sheaf of papers. "It's over, Jasper!" the Reverend yelled over the wind. "The truth is out!" Jasper skidded to a halt, his eyes wide with confusion. What was this? Augusta Price, her bonnet soaked and askew, stepped forward, her face grim. "Your mother!" she shouted, her voice cutting through the gale. "She wrote to me, Jasper, for years. She knew what you and your brother were. She was ashamed." Augusta held up one of the letters. "She sent me money, little by little, to try and pay back the people you'd robbed, and she sent me this." She held up a different letter. It was Daniel's confession, the real one, not the vague, useless one Nora had. This one named names. It detailed the cons, the robberies, and it explicitly stated that Jasper was the ringleader. It confessed that the attack on Samuel was Jasper's idea, and that Jasper had threatened to harm Nora if Daniel didn't go along with the story that she was the guilty one. "Your own mother sold you out, Jasper," Augusta said, her voice laced with contempt. "She wanted the truth to come out. She knew you would never stop hunting Eleanor. She wanted to protect her." Jasper stared at the letters, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. The foundation of his 3-year crusade, his righteous quest for justice, had crumbled into dust. He wasn't an avenger, he was just a common criminal, exposed by his own mother. The townsmen, who had been listening with rapt attention, now looked at him with disgust. He was no longer a victim. He was the villain of a story much uglier than the one he'd been telling. He dropped the axe. It fell to the muddy ground with a dull thud. He looked from the accusing face of Augusta Price, to the steady rifle in Nora's hands, to the hard, unforgiving eyes of Elias Hart. He was finished. Sheriff Gable stepped forward and snapped handcuffs onto his wrists. "Jasper Doyle," he said, the formality returning to his voice. "You're under arrest for a lot of things." As they led him away, a broken and defeated man, the rain began to soften. The wind died down. The storm, both in the sky and on the ground, was over. Elias lowered the shotgun, his arms heavy. He looked at Nora. She was looking at Augusta Price, who was carefully putting the precious letters back into an oilskin pouch. The two women, once adversaries, looked at each other across the muddy yard. Augusta gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was an apology. It was an acceptance. It was peace. The tide had finally, truly turned. In the days that followed, the town of Red Rock Crossing changed. The people who had thrown stones and insults now left gifts on the porch of the Hart Ranch. A loaf of bread, a jar of preserves, a newly knitted blanket for the twins. They were quiet offerings, unspoken apologies. Augusta Price became a frequent visitor, her sharp tongue now softened with a grudging respect. She and Nora would sit on the porch with the twins, a strange but powerful alliance forged in the heart of the storm. The ranch began to heal. With the help of his neighbors, Elias rebuilt the barn, stronger this time. The house, which had once felt like a tomb full of memories and a fortress under siege, began to feel like a home. The quiet rhythm between Elias and Nora deepened into something more. The shared danger, the fight for survival, had stripped away all pretenses. They had seen each other at their most vulnerable and at their strongest. One evening, as they sat on the new porch, watching the stars prick the vast, dark canvas of the sky, Elias turned to her. "You know," he said, his voice soft, "when you first came here, I told you that you were only here for the twins." Nora smiled, a genuine, beautiful smile that reached her eyes. "I remember. I was wrong," he said. He reached out and took her hand, her fingers laced with his, a perfect fit. "You're here for me, too, if you'll stay." "And what are we, Elias Hart?" she asked, her voice a whisper. He looked at their joined hands, then at her face, her steady eyes that had seen so much and feared so little. "Something worth keeping," he said. He leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of desperate relief or frantic passion. It was a kiss of quiet certainty, a promise of a new beginning, built not on secrets and ghosts, but on a foundation of hard-won, unshakable truth. Summer came, and the prairie bloomed. Elias and Nora were married by the river, under the shade of the cottonwood trees. The whole town was there. Augusta Price held Hope, and Silas Boone from the livery held Lily. Reverend Bennett read the vows, his voice full of joy. When Elias slid the ring onto Nora's finger, it rested over the faint, silvery scar on her wrist, a reminder of the past she had overcome and the future she had claimed. He looked at his wife, his daughters, his friends. His life had been hollowed out by grief. But this woman, this stranger who had appeared in a storm, had filled it again. She hadn't just saved his daughter's life. She had saved his. That night, the house was quiet. But it was a different kind of quiet. Not the empty silence of loss, but the peaceful quiet of a family, whole and safe. Elias had once tried to build a fence around his heart, to keep the world out. But a desperate knock on the door, a baby's first breath, and a woman who kept her promises had torn that fence down, and in its place, they had built a home. The story could have ended there. A happy ending, earned through fire and fear. But sometimes the deepest secrets aren't the ones that are shouted in a storm. They're the ones that are whispered in the dark, long after the fighting is done. And the true story of why Nora Hale really came to Red Rock Crossing was a truth that only one person left alive knew, and it was a secret she would take to her grave. But if you look close, the clues are there. In the identical birds, in Margaret's convenient premonition, in a promise made between two women, a promise far deeper than anyone could ever imagine. What do you think that final promise was? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one.